Anita pressed her hand gently against the fabric of the old armchair, her fingers tracing the worn grooves in the armrest. It had traveled with her through 3 apartments and 1 tiny house, the same way her sewing kit had, quiet companions in the soft corners of her life. Now it stood folded near the door, waiting to be loaded into her son-in-law's truck. She turned her head slowly, surveying the living room that had once echoed with her daughter's laughter and the scratchy hum of the television. Every picture frame on the wall had been wrapped in newspaper, every book tucked carefully into boxes. What remained was silence. Her back ached, but she didn't complain. The body learned things after all, how to crouch without creaking, how to hold grief at the edge of the throat, and still smile. "It's strange," she said aloud, her voice soft, "to pack up a life and have it fit inside 10 boxes and 1 kettle." She chuckled, almost surprised by the sound. The flat had been small, but it had been hers. After decades spent sewing hems and fixing zippers for neighbors and their children, Anita had managed what she always said she would: a modest space, clean and paid for, with enough left over for fresh fruit and good tea. She had raised her daughter here in a room with wallpaper that peeled in the corners and a window that always stuck in winter. When Lena suggested she move in with them, Anita hesitated. "You'd have more support," her daughter had said, brushing stray hair behind her ear. "And it's smart. Your pension can help cover a few things, groceries, maybe even some improvements. It's just more efficient this way." Anita had nodded then, more out of love than logic. She told herself it was the right choice. "Families take care of each other," she murmured now, as she sealed the last box shut with a line of clear tape. A honk from outside made her flinch. Mark's truck idled by the curb. She lifted the smaller boxes first, careful not to strain her hip, and carried them to the door. The armchair would need help. She'd leave that for last. Before stepping out, she looked back once. The empty flat seemed larger now. The echo was sharper. Her eyes lingered on the outline in the carpet where the chair had always stood. "Well," she whispered, "here we go." Then, gathering her bag and the worn kettle wrapped in a dish towel, Anita walked out, locking the door behind her for the final time. The house smelled like lavender and fresh paint. As Anita stepped through the front door, Lena greeted her with a wide smile and a carefully curated embrace. "Come in, Mommy," she said, brushing a speck of dust from Anita's shoulder. "We cleared out the guest room. It's all yours now." Anita nodded, trying not to look too long at the gleaming floors or the tall glass vases filled with decorative stones. Everything in the house was coordinated: white, slate gray, soft blush. The space felt more like a showroom than a home, but she smiled anyway. "It's beautiful, Lena. You've made a lovely place here." Mark appeared from the hallway with Anita's suitcase in one hand and a box under his arm. "Let me get that to your room. We set up the dresser and put some lavender sachets in the closet. Lucia thought it'd help you settle in." He offered a polite smile before disappearing down the hall. Anita followed slowly, her house shoes quiet on the hardwood. The guest room was small but tidy. A full-sized bed with a stiff-looking duvet sat beneath a floating shelf lined with tiny succulents. Her boxes had already been stacked neatly in the corner, sealed and undisturbed. She noticed that the dresser drawers were labeled with crisp tags: sleepwear, linens, seasonal. It was thoughtful, in a way that felt rehearsed. Later, as they gathered in the kitchen for a light lunch, Lena placed a single sandwich on a bamboo plate and set it in front of Anita. "We're trying to do more clean eating," she said, opening a bottle of cucumber water. "Gluten-free wraps, organic hummus, that sort of thing. It's better for digestion." Anita nodded politely, even though she missed the crusty rolls and steaming soups she'd made for herself in her old flat. Over the meal, they spoke of logistics, her pension deposits, grocery needs, house routines. Lena tapped her phone as she spoke. If it's okay with you, we'll link your pension to the joint account. Just easier to keep everything in one place. That way we're not nickel and diming receipts every week. Anita hesitated, then offered a small smile. Of course, it makes sense. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Anita stared at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of Lena and Mark laughing down the hall. She wasn't unhappy, just unmoored. Change was like that, she told herself. A ripple before calm. She reached into her bag, pulled out her tea tin, and placed it gently on the nightstand. One thing at a time, she whispered, closing her eyes and folding her hands over the blanket. Anita was careful not to leave a trace. Each morning she folded her blanket with crisp corners and tucked it under the edge of the bed. In the kitchen she rinsed her teacup and dried it immediately, returning it to the cupboard without a sound. She had always believed in being useful, but invisible, like a well-made hem, holding things together, never drawing attention. At first, it felt like adjustment. Anita reminded herself she was still getting used to the rhythm of the house. Lena's schedule ran like clockwork: morning yoga, afternoon design consults, phone calls filled with words like aesthetic balance and curated minimalism. Mark drifted in and out between work and gym sessions, nodding politely and murmuring, "Need anything, Anita?" without slowing down. One afternoon, Anita tried to catch the news while folding laundry in the living room. The television volume was low, her movements quiet. Still, Lena appeared from the hallway and said, "Oh, Mommy, would you mind folding those in your room? I just finished tidying this space and I want it to breathe." Anita nodded without protest, gathering the soft piles of towels and socks into her arms. She told herself it was reasonable. Everyone liked a tidy house. Another day, Anita reached for the washer, but found a basket of white towels already loaded. A sticky note on the lid read, "Please text before using. Timing matters for utility costs." She stared at it for a moment, her thumb brushing over the edge. Then she carried her small pile of clothes back to her room and waited until the evening. The tea kettle vanished not long after. One morning, as she prepared to make her breakfast, Anita opened the cupboard and paused. The familiar metal pot was gone, replaced by a matte black electric kettle with buttons she didn't recognize. She stared at it for a few seconds before hearing Lena's voice from behind her. "Oh, we upgraded. The old one didn't fit the vibe anymore. This one's smart. Just tap here for herbal." Lena tapped the side with a fingernail painted a perfect shade of taupe and smiled. "Let me know if you want me to show you how to use it." Anita managed a polite "thank you" and stepped back. She waited until the kitchen was empty before testing the buttons, but the kettle beeped loudly, then flashed a blinking red light. Embarrassed, she filled a mug with warm tap water and made do. Later that night, she sat at the edge of her bed, holding the mug in both hands. The water had cooled too quickly. She stared at it in silence, letting the steam fade. She didn't feel unwanted, not yet. But something was shifting, not a storm, no raised voices or slammed doors, but a quiet weathering, like stone smoothed by wind. The house was still warm, still filled with the scent of lavender and clean paint, but Anita could feel the edges beginning to blur. The conversation began over lentil soup and a small salad served in ceramic bowls that matched the placemats. Lena had lit a candle at the center of the table, unscented, ivory, and perfectly symmetrical. Mark had just finished explaining the contractor's delay on a client's remodel when Lena set her spoon down and looked directly at Anita. "So, we've been thinking," she said, brushing a non-existent crumb from the tablecloth, "about doing something with the kitchen." Anita paused with her spoon halfway to her mouth. "Oh?" she said gently, trying to keep her tone neutral. She glanced around, The cabinets were worn, yes, and the laminate counter had started to peel along the edges, but everything still worked. She had cleaned the stove just that morning. Lena leaned forward, her eyes shining with excitement. We want to open the space up, knock out that back wall to make a proper breakfast nook, add an island, granite counters, smart appliances, like an induction cooktop that connects to the app. It's not just an upgrade, it's a real investment in the house's value. She glanced at Mark, who nodded in agreement. Mark added, "It would raise the resale significantly, and to be honest, we've outgrown the space." Anita folded her napkin in her lap, pressing the corners flat. "It sounds ambitious," she said slowly, choosing her words with care. "Do you already have a budget in mind?" Lena's smile brightened. "That's actually where it gets easier. Since we're pooling resources now, we thought it made sense to use a little from the joint account, just a portion, to get started. We're all benefiting, after all. It's a shared home." Anita nodded slowly, not speaking yet. The word pooled echoed in her mind. It was what they'd agreed on, wasn't it? A shared life, shared costs. Still, she hesitated. "We'd, of course, show you all the quotes and receipts," Mark added quickly. "Transparency and all that." Lena picked up the thread. "And it's not like you'd have to do anything. We'll handle the contractors. You can relax. Let us make it easier for you." Anita managed a small smile, though her stomach had gone a little tight. "If it's for the family," she said carefully, "then I'm happy to contribute. Just let me know what you need." "Perfect!" Lena beamed, already tapping something into her phone. "I'll add you to the renovation board. It's a Pinterest/budget tracker. Very sleek. You'll love it." Later that night, alone in her room, Anita unfolded the printout Lena had given her, a list of initial renovation estimates. She recognized none of the brands. She set it down beside her pension ledger and stared at the 2 pages in silence. She didn't doubt Lena's intentions, but something about the excitement in her voice, the way the word investment had been spoken more than once, made Anita feel like a signature on a check rather than part of a home. The sound started early. Sharp cracks, the whine of drills, the groan of old plaster giving way. Anita pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders as she sipped lukewarm tea from a travel mug she had dug out of storage. The kettle was gone, packed away somewhere she couldn't find, and the electric one still beeped and blinked at her like a thing that didn't want to be used. Outside her room, men in dusty boots stomped through the hallway. The kitchen had already been emptied, every cabinet bare, every drawer gutted. Even the fridge had been moved to the garage. Anita tiptoed past the noise, hoping for a quiet corner in the dining room to sit with her tea, but a blue tarp had been draped over the chairs, and a sander shrieked from somewhere near the pantry. Lena appeared behind her, ponytail tucked through a baseball cap, voice raised to carry over the noise. "Sorry, Mommy, it's chaos today. Maybe you could hang out in your room. It's just, there's a lot going on, and we don't want you to trip or anything." She offered an apologetic smile, then turned to shout something at a worker who was unloading tile samples. Anita nodded wordlessly and retreated. She understood. She wasn't in the way, exactly, just not in the picture. Later that afternoon, when the banging quieted for a spell, Anita ventured outside for air. She walked the block slowly, nodding to neighbors she didn't yet know. At the end of the street, she found Mrs. Nguyen sweeping her porch. The older woman looked up and smiled warmly. "Anita," she said, setting the broom aside, "I heard you moved in with your daughter. How is it going?" Anita hesitated. "It's good. They're doing renovations. Everything's upside down right now." Mrs. Nguyen nodded with understanding. "Ah, that can be hard. Young people want modern everything. My niece took down my spice shelves when I stayed with her, said they looked messy. But some things hold memory, you know." Anita smiled faintly. "Yes, the old stove squeaked, but I knew every knob by heart." You don't say anything, of course, Mrs. Nguyen continued gently, because they mean well, but you start to feel like a visitor, even in the middle of your own life. The words struck deeper than Anita expected. She nodded, then glanced toward the street. I should get back. Thank you for the chat. Come by any time, Mrs. Nguyen said. My kettle still whistles. That evening, Anita sat in her room while the walls trembled with hammering and the air filled with dust she could taste. The scent of lavender had vanished beneath sawdust and adhesive fumes. She sipped her now cold tea and stared at the ceiling, telling herself it was temporary. Just a season. Just a kitchen. Still, something in her chest felt unsettled, like fabric stretched one stitch too tight. When the last contractor left, the silence felt staged, like a theater after the curtain dropped. The kitchen no longer smelled of garlic or dish soap, but of newness, paint, sealant, polished steel. Anita stepped into the space slowly, her slippers muted against the flawless tile floor. She barely recognized it. The room had been transformed into something out of a showroom catalog: sleek cabinets with no handles, a matte black sink, and an island the size of her old living room table. A refrigerator the height of a man stood flush against the wall, its touchscreen glowing faintly with a cheerful weather report. Lena stood in the center, beaming, her phone already held high to capture a video for her social media. Isn't it stunning? Look at this light. It's like a magazine, and it's so intuitive. Everything connects to the app. She tapped her phone, and the stove lit up in a soft blue ring. It tells you when the burner's hot. Smart safety, right? Anita smiled politely, though her eyes searched the counters. The kettle hadn't returned, nor had the ceramic mug with the chip in the rim, the one she used every morning. She spotted new ones, all uniform, white and ridged like seashells, lined neatly beside a tray of imported tea sachets. Where's the kettle? She asked gently. Oh, Lena replied, still holding her phone. It didn't match, and we don't really need it anymore. This one heats to exact temperatures for different teas: green, oolong, chamomile, you name it. Just press here. She motioned vaguely toward the new electric fixture tucked beside the outlet. Anita reached out and ran her fingers along the smooth edge of the island. It's very modern, she said, her voice even. Mark walked in then, glancing around with a low whistle. Wow, every time I see it, it looks even better. He noticed Anita and added, Nice, right? Anita nodded again, but she didn't answer. She had nothing to press, nothing to stir. There was no cloth towel hanging from the oven handle, no chipped bowl waiting to be filled. She felt like a guest in a hotel lobby kitchen, welcome, but only if she didn't touch anything. That night, she tried to boil water for tea. She pressed the buttons the way Lena had shown her, but nothing happened. A small red icon blinked in the corner of the screen. She tapped again. The machine chirped, then went dark. After 3 tries, she gave up and filled a mug with warm tap water. It tasted metallic. The next morning, she reached for the bread box and found it locked, digitally sealed with a code. It's to keep the carbs under control, Lena said with a breezy laugh. We're trying to be more mindful. The diet starts with the environment, you know? Anita smiled faintly, though something inside her chest had begun to close. She stepped out of the kitchen without a word, retreating to her room as the sun spilled across the pristine countertops behind her. Anita noticed it one quiet afternoon while dusting the hallway shelf. Her wedding photo, the small black and white one with the slightly torn corner, was gone. In its place hung a minimalist print of a feather floating on a pale beige background. She stood in front of it for a long moment, unsure if she had simply misplaced the frame herself. But no, she remembered wiping the glass last week, right before Lena's friend came over for the house tour. She asked about it over dinner that evening. Did you move the pictures in the hall? She asked gently, folding her napkin into a triangle. Oh, Lena said, sipping sparkling water. I just wanted the space to feel a bit more cohesive. The vintage frames didn't really fit the aesthetic. But don't worry. I stored everything safely in the garage bin marked keepsakes. Her tone was cheerful. Final. Anita nodded, though her throat had gone dry. She didn't ask to see the bin. Soon after, her mug vanished. The one with the faded roses and the slight chip in the handle, it had survived moves, years, grief. She looked through the cupboards twice, then again, slower. In its place stood identical white mugs in a precise row. When she mentioned it, Lena smiled. I thought it was cracked. Didn't want you to cut yourself. I got you new ones. See? They're part of the set. Even the house's sounds began to shift. The gentle chime of her kitchen clock, gone. Her small tabletop radio, unplugged, then removed. We stream music now, Mark had said with a casual shrug. Less clutter, and the voice assistant can play anything. You just have to ask. But Anita didn't know what to ask for, and even when she did, the device often misheard her accent. Playing sports updates, it once replied when she asked for classical music. She unplugged it the next day. On weekends, Lena hosted yoga classes in the living room, 4 or 5 women in matching leggings, chanting softly to a phone propped against the fireplace. Anita tried to stay out of the way, keeping to her room with her knitting. One Saturday, she emerged quietly to warm some tea, only to find a sign taped to the hallway. Do not disturb. Flow in progress. She stood for a long while in front of the sign, then turned back, her slippers silent on the floor. The tea could wait. She told herself none of it was malicious. Lena and Mark were modern, efficient. She had moved into their rhythm, not the other way around. I'm just adjusting, she whispered one night, sitting on the edge of her bed. But in her chest, a space had begun to hollow. Not from anger, but from absence. She looked around her room. It still held her things, her books, her robe, the old pincushion. But the house beyond those walls no longer felt like it belonged to her, or even remembered she was there. It was the kind of moment that might have passed unnoticed, a stray phrase carried through an open door, no louder than the rustle of a page or the creak of a stair. Anita hadn't meant to linger in the hallway. She had come to return a towel to the linen cupboard, walking softly, out of habit. But as she passed Lena's office, the door stood ajar, and her daughter's voice floated out, bright and lilting. She finally got the hint, Lena was saying, a smile audible in her tone. No more hovering. Honestly, that kitchen was too expensive to share. There was a soft laugh. Lena's friend, maybe one of the yoga women. You're terrible. No, really, Lena continued, still laughing. She's sweet, but it's exhausting. She just stands there like she's waiting to be told what to do. I mean, I get it. She's old school, but that space has flow now. She'd boil water and throw the whole mood off. Anita didn't move. Her feet felt like they'd fused to the hardwood. She couldn't see her daughter, but she could picture her easily, leaning back in her white leather chair, one hand twirling a pen, the other scrolling through photos of the newly renovated kitchen. The kitchen Anita had helped pay for. The kitchen where her kettle no longer belonged. She hasn't touched the stove in days, Lena added. It's honestly a relief. Anita turned slowly and walked back to her room without a sound. The towel still hung over her arm. She folded it neatly once she sat down, her movements precise. She didn't cry. There was no confrontation, no gasp of betrayal, just a growing clarity, like light cutting across a dusty room, revealing what had always been there. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out her receipt folder. It had started as a simple habit, keeping track of deposits, noting grocery expenses, marking monthly transfers. But now she flipped through it with purpose. Bank printouts, pension statements, notes from her initial agreement with Lena. She began laying them out on her bed, one by one, as if assembling pieces of a puzzle she had finally decided to solve. Later that evening, during dinner, Anita said nothing. She complimented Lena's quinoa salad, nodded at Mark's story about a supplier mishap, and helped clear the table when asked. Her movements were smooth, practiced. No one noticed the difference. No one saw the quiet thread of distance tightening in her spine. After the dishes were done, she returned to her room, closed the door gently, and placed a new folder on her nightstand, one marked with a single label in her own handwriting: Documents. Then she opened her notebook and began writing, not in anger, not for revenge. She simply wanted the facts to be ready. Anita began each morning the same way, early, quiet, deliberate. She brewed tea using the microwave now, though it never quite tasted right. Then she sat by the window in her room, sunlight pooling on the floor beside her slippers, and opened the folder. It was an old accordion file with a cracked latch, labeled simply Household. Inside were the seeds of her contribution: pension deposits, digital transfers, copies of bills she had helped pay. There were handwritten notes in the margins of her ledger: amounts, dates, occasional questions. Paid for groceries? Lena reimbursed? Renovation invoice? Mark or me? She hadn't realized, until now, how often her contributions had blurred into theirs. She recopied the most important pages, adding clear labels and sticky notes to mark them. She made 2 extra copies and placed them in manila envelopes. Her hands moved steadily, without tremor or doubt. It wasn't about confrontation. Anita didn't believe in shouting matches or ultimatums. She believed in preparation. By midweek, she had contacted a local community center that Mrs. Nguyen had once mentioned. They had a small office, a coffee machine, and a patient woman named Imani, who greeted her with a kind smile and a quiet voice. "Take your time," Imani said, motioning her to sit. "Start from wherever feels comfortable." Anita unfolded a copy of her pension statements. "I moved in with my daughter about 9 months ago. We agreed to share expenses. I've been contributing steadily since then: utilities, groceries, and then some of the renovation costs." Imani nodded, listening closely. "Has there been any formal agreement? Something signed?" "No," Anita said. "It was all verbal. We trusted each other." "That's very common," Imani replied. "Do you feel like the arrangement is still fair?" Anita paused. She looked at her hands resting on the paper. "It used to be, but now I'm not sure what I'm paying for. I don't use the kitchen anymore. I mostly stay in my room, and they—" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "They treat the house like it's theirs. I'm starting to feel like a tenant without a lease." Imani gave a small, understanding nod. "That's not unusual. But you do have rights, especially if you've been contributing financially. It may not be formal, but it's not invisible." Anita felt something loosen slightly in her chest. She had come not to make trouble, but to understand, to see clearly what had been murky. Imani offered to help her draft a statement and walked her through the basics of residential contribution, financial boundaries, and what support was available if she needed to find her own place. When Anita left the center, the air outside felt lighter. She walked slower on the way back, stopping at the corner store to buy a fresh notepad and a box of her favorite tea. That night, she labeled a new section in her folder: Next Steps. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't panicking. She was getting ready. The cafe was small and a little too bright, tucked between a dry cleaner and a dentist's office. Anita chose a corner table by the window, far enough from the clatter of the espresso machine to hear herself think. She ordered a pot of chamomile tea, the kind that came in a clear glass with a floating flower bulb. It wasn't her usual, but it made her feel like she belonged in a place where people worked on laptops and wore earbuds. Imani arrived 5 minutes later, coat folded neatly over her arm, notebook already in hand. She greeted Anita with a warm nod, no fuss, and sat down without checking her phone. "How are you feeling today?" she asked, her voice quiet but direct. Anita smoothed the edge of her sleeve. More clear, not angry, just awake. Imani opened her notebook. "That's a good place to start from." She pulled out a handout, something printed in calm colors with gentle fonts. "This outlines some of your options, just so you know what support systems exist. Everything from housing assistance to legal aid if you decide to make changes." Anita scanned the page slowly, her finger tracing the bullet points. "I'm not looking to make waves. I just want to understand where I stand." "You're not making waves," Imani replied. "You're drawing a line. There's a difference." They talked for nearly an hour. Imani asked thoughtful questions. Had Anita signed any documents giving financial control to her daughter or son-in-law? Was her name on the house title or lease? Had she kept records of her monthly contributions? "Yes," Anita said calmly. "I've kept everything. Dates, transfers, even grocery receipts where I used my card." Imani smiled. "That's more than most. You're in a good position to advocate for yourself." They discussed soft exits, how to begin separating finances gradually, how to initiate conversations about boundaries without confrontation, how to document her next steps in case formal support became necessary. "Think of it as protecting your space, not leaving it," Imani offered. "Even if you stay, you deserve clarity." Anita nodded, placing the handout gently into her handbag. "It helps, having language for this. It makes me feel less like I'm imagining things." "You're not imagining anything," Imani said. "You're observing. That's different. And powerful." When the tea was finished and the cafe began to hum with a louder afternoon crowd, Anita rose and thanked her. The sun outside had begun to shift, casting long shadows against the sidewalk. She felt steadier, as though her feet had found firm ground after months of tiptoeing. She took the long way home, pausing to browse at a small bookstore. She didn't buy anything, but she liked the way the shelves were organized, every title visible, nothing hidden. That evening she returned to her room and added the new handouts to her folder. No threats, no tension, just preparation, as quiet and deliberate as every stitch she had ever sewn. The letter began like any other she'd written in her life, with a blank page, a well-worn pen, and a steady hand. Anita sat at her desk as the sky outside softened into evening. The light filtered through her curtains in thin golden bands, casting long stripes across the carpet. She paused for a moment before beginning, collecting the words in her mind like fabric pieces before a careful stitch. She didn't want to accuse. That wasn't her way. She wanted the letter to be clear, honest, and calm. So she began simply. To Lena and Mark, I wanted to put a few thoughts in writing, so we could all understand where things stand. Her pen moved slowly, shaping each sentence with purpose. She listed her contributions, groceries, utilities, and the lump sum that had helped cover the initial renovation deposit. She included the monthly pension transfers, the dates, the amounts. She did not include emotion, but the facts spoke plainly. I entered this home believing we would share responsibility, space, and respect. I no longer feel that balance. There were no accusations, only observations. She noted when her name was removed from group texts about household decisions, when her belongings were moved or replaced without her input. She even included the overheard conversation, not verbatim, but enough to mark the shift it had caused. It is not the kitchen itself that has changed, but the understanding of who is welcome in it. She signed it with her full name, Anita Torres, and placed the finished letter in the center of the desk. Then she made 2 copies, one for her folder, one for a sealed envelope that would rest beside their dinner plates. She moved on to organizing the documents. The pension statements were paper-clipped and labeled. The renovation transfer printout had a sticky note attached, joint expense, no repayment ever discussed. She included the grocery receipts with the highlighted totals marked, "From Anita." Every page was clean, uncreased, deliberate. By the time she finished assembling the packet, the house had quieted. Mark had taken a phone call outside. Lena was upstairs, likely folding her yoga mats or posting a new photo of the kitchen with the light that poured in just so, the marble that gleamed like water. Anita placed the 2 sealed envelopes, identical in thickness, on the dining table. She didn't leave a note. She didn't wait for them to find it. She returned to her room and sat with her tea, this time made with water she had boiled at Mrs. Nguyyen's earlier that day. The kettle there still whistled. She didn't know what Lena would say. Or Mark. It didn't matter. The point was not to ask for anything. Not permission. Not apology. It was to mark the moment, to state, clearly and without anger, that she had seen everything, and remembered it. Dinner was roasted vegetables and grilled fish, plated in geometric portions on matte ceramic dishes. Lena had arranged sprigs of rosemary on each plate and lit a single pillar candle in the center of the table. Mark poured water from a glass carafe, talking about a potential client who was really into clean lines and open space. Anita listened, nodding occasionally, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She waited until the plates were cleared. When Lena reached for her phone and Mark excused himself to check a message, Anita rose quietly from her chair and retrieved the 2 envelopes from the counter. Without ceremony, she placed one in front of each of them, then returned to her seat. No announcement. No explanation. Mark looked at his envelope curiously. "What's this?" "Something I've been working on," Anita said gently. "Just some records and thoughts. I wanted to be clear about a few things." Lena opened hers first. Her expression didn't change at first, but Anita noticed the slight shift in her posture, the way her back straightened, how her fingers paused mid-turn on the first page. Mark flipped through his packet with more confusion than concern, his brow furrowing at the statements, the notes, the printed email receipts. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence stretched across the table, more tangible than the candlelight flickering between them. Anita didn't fidget. She sipped her tea and let the stillness settle. Lena finally set her packet down, pressing her palm flat on the table. "Why are you giving us this? Are you upset?" "No," Anita said, her voice level. "I just wanted the details to be seen. All of them. Everything I've contributed, every arrangement we've made. I thought it was important that we all have the same understanding." Mark glanced at Lena, who was chewing the inside of her cheek. "Is this about the kitchen?" he asked. "Because if you wanted to use it more, we could—" "It's not about the kitchen," Anita replied softly. "It's about knowing where I stand. I've spent the past few months trying not to get in the way, trying not to ask too much. But I've realized that if I disappear quietly enough, people start to believe they built everything on their own." Lena looked away. "You could have just told us." "I am telling you," Anita said, "but I wanted it to be clear, not a moment of emotion, but a record of fact." The candle flickered as a draft passed through the room. No one reached to relight it. Anita stood, her plate already clean, and carried her teacup to the sink. She didn't slam the cupboard. She didn't raise her voice. She simply placed the cup in the drying rack and turned off the light above the stove. Behind her, the packet sat on the table, unopened beyond the first few pages, but heavy with presence. The next conversation would come later. She had said enough for now. The conversation that followed was quieter than Anita expected. No raised voices, no accusations, just an awkward politeness that settled over the house like a film of dust. Lena became unusually busy, spending long hours in her office or out staging homes. Mark offered brief nods in passing, his eyes flicking away before they met hers. No one mentioned the envelopes again, but Anita noticed the way they had disappeared from the dining table by the next morning. She didn't press. She had never been one for theatrics. Instead, she began sorting through her belongings with quiet intention. A little each day. Books into neat stacks, her sewing supplies into labeled tins, keepsakes wrapped in scarves and tucked into sturdy bags. She made phone calls from the library, spoke to a kind leasing agent named Maya, who promised to show her a place just across town, small but bright, with good morning light, and most importantly, a gas stove. On the afternoon of the viewing, Mrs. Nguyen walked with her, arm linked loosely through Anita's. "It's nothing fancy," Maya warned as she unlocked the door, "but it's clean, safe, and well-maintained." The moment Anita stepped inside, she felt it. The air was warm, still carrying the faint scent of wood polish. The windows faced east and the light spilled in gently across the worn floorboards. The kitchen was narrow but practical, with old cabinets that closed with a satisfying click and a stove that didn't blink or beep, just turned on when you asked it to. "I'll take it," she said without hesitation. By the end of the week, the lease was signed. No ceremony, no announcement. She packed during the quiet hours, when Lena was out and Mark was distracted. She didn't hide it, but she didn't make a show of it either. The house had long stopped asking about her routines. On her last morning there, she stood in the kitchen one final time. The counters gleamed, untouched. She left the electric kettle exactly where it had always stood, its sleek surface catching the light. She didn't take anything that wasn't hers. Not the dishes, not the decorative mugs, not even the linen tea towels she had bought as a housewarming gift. At the door she paused, one hand resting on her small suitcase. Lena stood a few feet away, arms crossed, her voice tight. "You didn't have to go." Anita offered a calm smile. "I know." Mark added, "We didn't want things to get weird." "They didn't," Anita said gently. "They got clear." With a nod, she stepped outside. The taxi waited at the curb. Mrs. Nguyen had already sent a message. "I'll bring dumplings for your first night." As the house receded in the rearview mirror, Anita didn't look back. She held her kettle in her lap, wrapped in an old dishcloth. What lay ahead wasn't a return to solitude. It was a return to herself. There was no echo of other footsteps, no curated playlists humming from smart speakers. Just the soft tick of a wall clock Anita had brought from her old flat, and the faint rustle of curtains in the open window. Light spilled through in generous sheets, warming the kitchen tiles and casting long shadows from the potted herbs she'd already lined along the sill. Anita moved slowly through the space, her body adjusting to the rhythm of solitude. Not the sharp, aching kind, but the peaceful sort that wrapped around her like a cardigan. The stove clicked softly as she turned the knob. The flame caught with a steady whoosh. She set the old kettle on top and smiled at the familiar weight of it in her hand. No blinking lights, no sound but the slow building hush of water beginning to boil. She opened the cabinet and took down her chipped mug, the one with the fading roses. It looked slightly out of place against the freshly painted shelves, but she liked it that way. It was hers. It had history. A gentle knock came at the door. She opened it to find Mrs. Nguyen holding a steaming container and a brown paper bag. "First meal in a new place should always come from someone else's kitchen," Mrs. Nguyen said with a smile, handing it over. "Dumplings, jasmine rice, and some ginger tea leaves." Anita stepped aside to let her in. "You're spoiling me." "I'm making up for all the times you smiled instead of asking for what you needed." They ate slowly at the small kitchen table, laughing over stories of thrift store finds and family recipes. There was no schedule, no subtle undercurrent pushing Anita out of the room, just two women sitting in the golden light, sharing food and space like they always had, without permission, without performance. Later, after the dishes were rinsed and stacked, Anita stood at the stove again, The kettle began to whistle that familiar, comforting call she hadn't heard in months. She poured the water slowly, watching the tea leaves bloom and unfurl. As the steam rose, she cradled the mug in both hands and sat by the window, her knees wrapped in a worn blanket, the evening light soft on her face. She didn't feel victorious. There was no sense of revenge, no triumph, just peace. She had made no demands, raised no voice, yet she had reclaimed something greater than a kitchen or a chair. She had reclaimed her shape in the world. And now, in the quiet of her own space, she took a long sip of tea and let it settle into her chest, like warmth coming home. Nothing clinked, nothing blinked. Everything was exactly where she had left it.